Access Minnesota. Issues that matter to you. Access Minnesota brings you the newsmakers and the stories that shape our everyday lives, with analysis from University of Minnesota faculty experts. Now, here's Jim Dubois.
Today, less than 1% of the U.S. population serves in the military. By contrast, during World War II, some 14 million Americans were in uniform. As the draft gave way to a volunteer force, military service is now largely a mystery to most of us. The experiences of veterans and those who currently serve are often generalized and marginalized. In an effort to bring veteran stories to the forefront, the Minnesota legislature designated October as Veterans Voices Month. The Minnesota Humanities Center is offering programs on veterans literature and theater and is recognizing veterans of notable achievement. This month on Access Minnesota, we'll hear from Colonel Cao in CCMI, a recipient of one of this year's awards. General Cao, a veteran of the Royal Lao Army in the Vietnam War, helped memorialize Lao veterans in Minnesota at Fort Snelling National Cemetery. We'll talk to Colonel Cao about his extraordinary story of fighting alongside the Americans at age 17 to his journey to Minnesota, where he continues to advocate for the formal recognition of Lao veterans. First, though, Trista Matas-Castillo from the Minnesota Humanities Center tells us about the significance of the Veterans Voices Awards. We're here with Trista Matas-Castillo and Cao in CCMI to talk about this year's Veterans Voices Awards. Trista is a Navy, Marine, and Minnesota Army National Guard veteran. She also chairs the Women Veterans Initiative for Minnesota, and she is the program officer for Veterans Voices at the Minnesota Humanities Center. Colonel Cao is a recipient of this year's Veterans Voices Awards. He's the executive director of the Royal Lao Veterans of America and a Royal Lao Army Veterans Special Guerrilla Unit Colonel. Trista, Colonel Cao, welcome to Access Minnesota.
Thank you. I appreciate to be here.
Thank you.
Trista, tell us about the Veterans Voices Awards. When did the awards start and who are they meant to honor?
Yeah, so this is our third year. So they started 3 years ago, and we started the program first with just one category, and those were veterans 40 and under that are on the rise category is where we started. And our idea was, how do we change the narrative of what people think veterans are to highlight and feature veterans in our community who are doing really great things? Oftentimes in media, in the news, on the big screen, we're depicted as either social problems or superheroes. And we wanted to change that image of what society thinks. And though both of those are true, it's incomplete. And so our goal really was, how do we complete that and highlight and show veterans who are teachers and doctors and attorneys and entrepreneurs and farmers that are doing really amazing things. And so since then, that first year, we added a second category to honor those veterans who have paved the way for us, and that's the legacy category. And so now we have two categories. We nominated received nominations from across the entire state of Minnesota and recognized 25 veterans this year.
How did you get involved in Veterans Voices?
I actually first started volunteering with the Humanities Center when they started to look in to see, what is this issue with veterans? We have a board member, Corinda Horton, on our board who said, the Humanities Center has often worked with cultures that are underrepresented or their voice isn't part of the dominant narrative of our stories. And she said, what about the veteran story? And so they invited me and about 40 other veterans in to have this conversation, and I've been there ever since. So it started volunteering, and now I run the program.
Tell us a bit about your experience in the military. When and where did you serve?
I was in a unique time right after President Clinton had taken over office, and was the first time they were trying to see if they could fully integrate men and women in the same career fields, in the same basic training. So I actually went through kind of in that integration phase in 1992, and I served in boot camp with men and women. In fact, I had a bunkmate. One side was from Kentucky, and another bunkmate, he was a Samoan. And so it was quite an interesting experience. I served 8 years in the Navy, and then was selected for an officer program called Boost. That while I was at Boost, I decided that I wanted to be a Marine because it wasn't just challenging enough, and so I switched over to the Marine Corps. I completed OCS at Quantico, Virginia, And then later found myself, for family reasons, needing to step out of the Marine Corps, and I joined the Minnesota National Guard, where I served another 5.5 years, ultimately commanding the military police company.
Who are this year's recipients of the awards?
So this year's awardees are like every other year's awardees. They're remarkable and each have a unique and different story to tell. We have veterans who are serving in projects like the Domestic Abuse Project, preventing domestic violence and helping with people who enter that criminal intersection. We have awardees who, like Colonel Cow, have served and left a legacy, continuing to serve their community after they leave the service. We have another legacy veteran who I actually have known since I was a young child, and he was still in the service and continues to serve today, and so it was a huge honor to recognize Steve Campos this year receiving the award. I think when Minnesota thinks of veterans who are giving back, they think of guys like Steve Campos and Colonel Cow and many of the others.
Tell us more about Colonel Cow. Why was he nominated this year?
Yeah, so this is probably personally the most exciting nomination we received, although all of them were great. I'm not on the selection committee, so that's the full disclosure, but since the program started, I've been anxiously waiting the time where we could have a conversation about who and what is a veteran, and is that defined by our legal speak in Minnesota and the United States by, you having to have served a certain amount of time and you have a DD-214, a discharge papers. This year, finally the question came because we have so many allied forces living right here in Minnesota that are veterans, but don't have the same paperwork or the recognition from our federal government. And when the conversation came up and Colonel Cow's nomination was received, and there were some other non-U.S. veterans nominations received, the question came up is, how do we receive this? And among veterans, it was instant. There was never a question. There was no doubt. It said, of course, they're veterans just like we are. We all have served. We have a unique culture that is different than any other culture, regardless of what our paperwork says or what country we serve for. We are serving for the greater good of our fellow citizens, of our fellow soldiers. We are warriors. We're born that way, we're taught that way, and we become leaders. And so for us in our military culture, it was instantly a no-brainer that it went right into the same pool of all the other nominations and was then reviewed and scrutinized in the same manner of every other nomination. So it's really exciting to have Colonel Cow then coming out, because it really is not about his military service, just the fact that he has that veteran status, that is a veteran, but really what he's done in his community since coming here to the United States.
Colonel Cow fought in the Royal Lao Army and is not actually recognized as a U.S. veteran. Is this a unique circumstance for Veterans Voices?
It's unique in that it's the first time, but I hope it's not the last and that it doesn't stay unique, because really our Veterans Voices program really is about how do we look at our military and veteran as a culture and what brings us together more than what divides us. And so it's unique and it's the first, and it's rightfully that Colonel Cow is the first, but I hope there'll be others.
When Access Minnesota returns, we'll hear from Colonel Cow and his stories about fighting in the Vietnam War.
Access Minnesota will return after these messages. You're watching Access Minnesota. Here's Jim Dubois.
Cow in CCMI served honorably in the Royal Lao Army in the Vietnam War. He was a colonel of a special guerrilla unit and commander of Group Mobile 33, a force of 3,000 men who secretly aided the U.S. efforts by intercepting and interjecting supplies in Laos. Cow commanded his troops during the Battle of Kong Se-Dun, where 2 North Vietnamese regiments were destroyed. Cow also evacuated many Lao to the U.S. when the war ended. This year, Colonel Cow helped memorialize the sacrifices of our Southeast Asian allies. A plaque at Fort Snelling National Cemetery honors the Royal Lao Army and those from other nearby countries who battled North Vietnamese forces. Cow is now focusing his efforts on gaining formal congressional recognition of his troops' service to the U.S. military. Here's Colonel Cow with his extraordinary story of service and sacrifice. Colonel Cao, tell us about your duties in the Royal Lao Army.
We have two missions. One is to protect the North Vietnamese or the communists to spread out. And second thing is to protect the Ho Chi Minh Trail from North Vietnam to South Vietnam. And the number of our troops was very small, but our combat effectiveness was stronger than the North Vietnamese. That's what I feel. I can defeat the North Vietnamese one by one without asking the airstrike. That's what I did. When the American advisor said, "Do you need airstrike?" Not today, not now. I want to show that I'm stronger. I have more morale. The morale of my men, the discipline, combat effectiveness is stronger than North Vietnamese. Scare them, make them know that we are strong. We are not stupid or coward soldier at home, even we are small. That's what we do in Laos.
What do you remember about combat?
Every day at home, I yell at home that, "Where's my M16? Who took my M16? Where's my boots?" Because during the war in Laos, we always have our boots on, except we don't tie. We have, and then one hand is the rifle, one hand is the radio that we talk to our men, and we talk to the Air Force. We can communicate. It's like when we sleep, the helmet is like here. We sleep with the helmet, the rifle, and the telephone. When we hear some income, and then when the enemy attack, we get up. We have everything on our hand. Put the helmet, put the zip on our boots and go. And that's something. Life was very terrible. Sometimes 5 days no food, bad weather, and airplane cannot come because the enemy, moved anti-aircraft, and then they cannot drop the food. So we have no food for 5 days, and we fight. Please think about the sacrifice, the blood, the hardship. I got wounded twice. My left leg is broken. My left leg was shot by AK-47. I have a lot of hole in my body. Even my right eye, a small fragment went to my right eye. And even my mouth, it hit around my teeth in the fragment. So please support us. Please help us. We need your help. Everybody help.
Why are the veterans of the Royal Lao Army not recognized formally by the U.S.?
I see that after the war, most of Lao officers from general were sent to the re-education camp, to seminar, they said. So they went to prison, and then many of them killed or died. So the family came here by themselves, family without father, and then nobody take care of the family. And then after they release from the re-education camp, which is really a jail or prison, so they have PTSD. They are physically and mentally ill. I do too, except I come back and once in a while, and when I think about the past, and then I say, "Oh, that's too much for me." But I stand up. I have to speak up on behalf of my friend, on behalf of the people that really fought. Because those who really fought want to gain recognition, want to gain something back,
Do you worry that younger generations of Laotians may not remember the sacrifice that your generation made?
So everywhere I go and I talk. I went to DC, I went to many places that Young Lao organization, because I'm one of the board members, and talk about what we sacrificed. We said the blood that we shed paved the way for you to come to the US. Memorize them. We lost more than 50,000 killed and more than 100,000 wounded. The number is equal to the American forces in South Vietnam. The population of the US is 300 million. But Laos was 3 million only. Because of us, you come here. Don't forget. Don't betray. Right. That's what I talk. Don't betray us, I got wounded. I served as a board of you young people, I'm over 70, but you you elected me to be a board with the young people, you know. I'm the only senior who work with you, but I ask you to study, and it's not coming to the U.S. It's not like for the economy purpose, you know, because you want to come and do the business. You come here because of sacrifice, because we work with the U.S. government. So after the war finished, so they invite everybody, say that, oh, I am belong to the Soto family, but arriving here, so you forget about us. So don't forget about us.
The Vietnam War ended 40 years ago. Colonel Cao, we still have you to tell your stories. Trista, you can relate your stories of service as well. But are you concerned as veterans die? We have no living veterans of World War I left. World War II veterans are dying at a very rapid pace. Once those people are gone and their stories with them, are you concerned that future generations might not hear what it was like to have served in those wars? And to what extent is Veterans Voices trying to preserve these accounts for future generations?
Absolutely, and it's not just about archiving, because we have lots and lots of archives of history, but if nobody reads it or engages with it, it's as well as being lost, you know, that it's stuck somewhere. But we really are striving to engage the community with these stories firsthand, so that they're experiencing and go deeper to fully understand, what does it mean to be a veteran? What does it mean to have served like Colonel Cao has served, or other veterans? Because we each have our own stories. There's not one narrative about what a veteran does. I mean, clearly we have completely different stories, and yet sitting here listening to Colonel Cao, I instantly feel connected to him, because we share a common culture in the way that we serve. And that's really what we're striving to do, is to share those stories with our communities for different engagement. In fact, it's so important for us to do this that last year the Minnesota legislature declared October as Veterans Voices Month. And so that it has gone into law now forever, that October is Veterans Voices Month. And we are working to build curriculum that we piloted this year in Minnesota high schools about the stories, about the literature, and connect students with veterans to ask deep questions and have these relationships. And so we plan to do that going into the future and into greater communities, to have those discussions so that society really understands, what does it mean to have served in this way.
Are you optimistic that Lao veterans will eventually gain the recognition they deserve?
We propose House Resolution 210 now to the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, and we have 32 votes as of last Friday. So we have 8 out of 10 members from the Foreign Affairs Committee. The number that we need is 10. I told politicians that I'm not U.S. ally. I am U.S. citizen. This is my home. I will die here. This is my land. I want to be buried. Same thing like a U.S. veteran die, because I fought, and then, you know, I protect American life also. The blood that we shed in Laos saved the blood of the American forces in South Vietnam. The life of the North Vietnamese communists killed in Laos saved the life of the U.S. Armed Forces in South Vietnam. That's what I say. Everywhere I go, so I talk about that. I got wounded twice, you know, rescue U.S. pilot down. First AA killed in Laos was standing next to me. When we fell into the ambush, he was killed and I was safe. So think about that. Think about our brother in arms. We serve the U.S. government, and this is my home, my new country, the land of the free and home of the brave. So we are proud to be U.S. citizens. So treat us like U.S. veteran. Don't say you are U.S. ally. I'm not U.S. ally no more. I'm U.S. citizen.
When Access Minnesota returns, Trista Mata-Castillo tells us about her work with women veterans and how Veterans Voices tells the stories of women and minorities who have served.
Access Minnesota will return after these messages. You're watching Access Minnesota. Here's Jim Dubois.
Back to our conversation with Trista Matacastillo and Kao in CCMI on the unique culture of veterans. Trista, tell us more about your work with women veterans. What issues are most pressing for female veterans today?
It's interesting. I think the first thing is that people don't often realize how many women veterans there are. In Minnesota alone, there are over 27,000 women veterans, and women are joining the military forces as fast as men are leaving. And so, at some point, I think we'll see in the next 50 years that it will even out. But first of all is recognition, and many women veterans feel that they've never been recognized or no one recognizes them. Just like the Lao veterans aren't recognized so often, is that again, the common narrative of what people think a veteran is doesn't include women or minorities, and we've been serving all along. So the first women were officially recognized in 1911 as veterans. So if you think how far long ago that was, and yet people still are surprised when I say I'm a veteran. So that's the number one issue. As far as anything else plaguing our veteran community, jobs, housing, education, healthcare, all of those things are also plaguing women veterans. But if you're never recognized, then the services aren't built for you. And so oftentimes we're an afterthought. And so those are kind of the top issues, is how do we design programs moving forward that take women in mind at the forefront instead of an afterthought.
Do female veterans have the same access to health care and the VA as men do?
Yes. Yep, access is there. A lot of times they don't know that, but that is the case with a lot of veterans across the board. But the access is the same, and the services are available. Now, of course, women's health care looks different than male's health care because our biology is different. It is improving, and some VAs are better than others. The Minneapolis VA happens to have state-of-the-art services for women's health care and is on the rise and is doing really well. And it's just really the women knowing that they have access to it and then seeking those services.
Universal military service is really a relic of World War II. In the wars that came subsequently, there were drafts, but there were a way around drafts. In Vietnam, of course, the college deferment. Now we have a volunteer military. Fewer than 1% of Americans have ever served in the military. Is Veterans Voices working to get these stories of service out to the public to help them better understand, as you mentioned, Trista, the culture of the military and the culture of military service?
Well, there's a couple of ways. Of course, we can engage with the Minnesota Humanities Center in our whole program. And we have events going on in communities across the state of Minnesota. We have touring exhibits that host sites will then hold events around War Memorial. We have plays and theater events, so you can always check on our website. There's ongoing discussions and literature. But the other way is, even if the Humanities Center isn't in their community, is to just reach out and talk to the veterans in their community and find their own way to celebrate and honor and have those deeper conversations. I think we can both say that we're eager to talk about our experience. And when you first understand that we are a culture, we have our own language, we have our own traditions, ceremonies, rituals, just like any other subculture. And so if you look at it that way and then explore what that means in a curious and loving way, veterans are going to be eager to share that. We don't want to be isolated and to be the 1% or the less than 1%. We want to be, and we are, part of our communities. Many people work with veterans and they don't even realize it because the question doesn't come up. We don't talk about it. It's like this thing in our past life. And so instead, to just start the conversation in a workplace, find out which employees are veterans, who has served in the military, and have that conversation. And make sure you're asking men and women and minorities equally, and don't make any assumptions by who you think is a veteran.
Trista, Colonel Kao, thank you so much for joining us on Access Minnesota.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can learn more about the Veterans Voices Project and the awards recipient by going online. That's all for this month's edition of Access Minnesota. We'll see you again next month. Thanks for watching.
Access Minnesota. Issues that matter to you. Join us again next week as we bring you the newsmakers and stories that shape our everyday lives. Access Minnesota is produced by the Minnesota Broadcasters Association in cooperation with the University of Minnesota's College of Liberal Arts.